Welcome to the Microcast, a short-form podcast from Microcosm Coaching, where we break down the science, strategy, and psychology behind smarter endurance training. Each week, we tackle a key concept in running, training, or recovery, and we give you practical tools you can apply right away, whether you're building back, leveling up, or chasing down a big goal. We keep it short, evidence-based, and grounded in real coaching experience. No hype, no fluff, just actionable insights to help you train sustainably and perform at your best. Let's get into it.
Over the next few weeks, we're going to introduce you to a few other Microcosm coaches on our podcast, so you can hear a little bit from them on who they are and what they're about.
My name is Kyle Jones, and I became a coach specifically to share my passion and love of running and doing big things. As a master's athlete and a little bit of an older athlete, I have a passion for doing things that I never once thought that I could do. And so I want to be a coach to help others pursue their big dreams and goals and do things they never once thought was possible, even at this later stage in their life. I love to coach specifically masters athletes who have recommitted themselves to achieving their goals, experiencing new endeavors, or undertaking something they never thought was possible with specifically a passion, a focus, and energy. I come with a mindset that it's never too late, and I love my athletes to have that same vision, that same passion there where they dive in and it's all in, and it's about a lifestyle, not just a hobby. As a coach, I love to help my athletes solve two basic problems that I feel like I can do very, very well. One of those is helping the master's athlete accrue the needed volume and training while staying injury-free through sustainable and durable training programs. Being a master's athlete myself, I really have a focus on helping my athletes get to where they want to go. I also feel like I'm really, really good at helping my athletes solve the problems of ultra running beyond just the training. There's so many other aspects to trail running and ultra running, including shoes and packs and vests and gear and poles and nutrition and hydration and strategy. And I feel like I am really good at simplifying all of that, because all of those small things add up to be a pretty significant factor come race day. It's never too late. And I use the term all in as well. So whatever the dream or goal, I want to share the mindset of it's never too late to be who you are and do the things that you want to do, because I'm super high energy. I bring a high level of stoke to my training process with my athletes. So what I have in common with my athletes is an all-in mentality. I love that training is not a hobby, it's more of a lifestyle for me. My athletes are people that go all in, that put all their energy and focus and stoke and attention into their training so that they can accomplish the things that they want to accomplish and live the life they want to live. I help masters athletes become who they've always wanted to be.
If you want to get to know anyone else on our staff, reach out. We have roster spots available. microcosmcoaching@gmail.com.
Welcome back to the studio, Zoe.
We're here again.
Yeah. Excited.
I'm excited as well. I'm hydrated. Most importantly, I'm well hydrated.
Wow.
Actually,
that's good, because we did a whole outline on hydration.
Yay!
So I'm glad that you're following the principles that we've outlined here.
Yeah, historically, I feel like I've not been a rock star hydrator in my daily life. I am trying to drink more water. Coffee counts. I feel like the number one myth that I want to dispel right off the bat is that coffee is a diuretic. If you consume it at your baseline, it's fine.
It's okay.
It counts as water. It is water. Right. Yes. So
I feel like people get pretty
coffee,
worried about that.
100%. And just let me have my coffee in peace.
You know what? You can have your coffee. You have a very high baseline for coffee consumption.
No, I have a below average baseline, actually.
You come across as somebody who drinks a lot of coffee.
That's just because I have a bad personality, but a normal caffeine baseline. Those are different issues.
Oh my gosh. And we're already starting off the podcast with a ton of fluff. We said we weren't going to do that.
No, people like it. They want, it's chemistry.
It is.
It's what we have.
It's fun. We have something here. I will say
we did once have someone someone commented on our YouTube channel that we had zero chemistry and we acted like we had never spoken before, which I find extremely funny. This was when you were still developing your podcast persona.
I was still developing my persona, huh?
Yep. Yeah.
Great. Good feedback. Thank you. I appreciate, you know what?
That
all feedback is welcome. Not all feedback is
equally valid.
Yes, or assimilated into my way of being going forward.
Yeah. Well, I think our chemistry has improved. I'll be honest. I don't ever think it was like bad, but it was definitely not amazing on tape.
One of us is a professional podcaster.
The other one is a normal human being.
Yes, who prefers to just be behind the scenes at home, behind a locked door.
It's good. That's normal. It's
in
healthy.
Their office.
Sometimes I do wonder like what it does to my brain that I like professionally record my thoughts and things I say.
It's good.
So directly.
It's good to be that vulnerable publicly.
It's not good.
You're very courageous.
You know, just like imagine like, you know, when you see petroglyphs, I'm like, my version of this, like imagine if the petroglyphs that we found from like way back in the day were just like cave people's like shitty takes about like athletic greens. And that's all that survived.
You know, I think that if we were to really start consuming athletic greens, we would likely I think we digress as a species, personally.
Just eat vegetables, man.
Just
eat vegetables.
Anyways, digressing as podcast co-hosts, we're talking about hydration today. I think this is a super important topic as we get into the summer, and it's already been, you know, unseasonably warm in many areas. I've seen in my coaching corner of the world, athletes already kind of struggling to make the shift from winter hydration into summer or spring hydration. And one of the things that I've also noticed in myself recently when I was out racing at canyons is I had potentially had some hydration issues as a result of the humidity.
Yeah.
So I took a deep dive into some of the downstream side effects and negative impacts of being dehydrated in an endurance event. And there are many.
Yes. And they're not all what you would think.
No,
because I think people think like, oh, like what, you know, dehydration, it means I feel thirsty or I don't feel good, or sodium, it means cramping. And no, it's way more complicated than that. And it's actually way more interesting in a fun way. And the reason we actually had this scheduled for later in the spring, and we decided to move it up because we've just been seeing a lot of athletes recently struggling with this very issue, struggling with nausea, cramping, falling apart later in races, sort of like
you looked at me just
heart rate
dead
issues.
in the eyes.
That was not a comment
when
on
you said that.
That was not a comment. I have done this in races, like who amongst us? But I think what it is that people often overlook hydration and sodium intake as a part of their overall nutrition and strategy. So we're going to get into the nitty gritty on that today, because the truth is, if you're being extremely strategic and you're absolutely nailing like the gels and the chews, but you're not being as strategic and intentional about your fluid and your sodium, doesn't matter what you put in your mouth. It's not going to matter.
Oh, man. And I can't wait for us to lay this all out for you guys so you understand just how important this is. I feel like this may be one of the most critical pieces.
Just like the number. It's like honestly one of the most common mistakes I see is like people go sleuthing for, they're like, I had this weird symptom in an ultra and I got on, you know, like WebMD and I think it's this like bizarre genetic heart thing. And I'm like, did you drink sodium? And they're like, no. And I'm like, so it's not a medical mystery at all. Like this is, congratulations, you're a human. This is solvable.
The simplest answer is usually the correct one.
Yeah. Occam's sodium sweat test.
I like that. He was the guy who definitely would have gotten a sodium sweat test.
Immediately. Yeah. He would not have been like faffing around without a specific awareness of his sodium needs.
All right. Well,
shout out Occam.
Shout out. I don't really know who you are,
philosopher,
but you are great. Before we dive into that part of the conversation, let's just shift gears a little bit here because we had a great listener question come in. And why don't you run us through that? I think it's a good way to break the ice at the beginning of this episode. I know my brain is
Put our marital chemistry to the test.
Let's talk about sexual health here.
Absolutely. I know that's what people come to the pod for.
They've been waiting for this.
No, this actually,
years.
I thought was such a, like, I'm always so blown away that like the listener questions we get, and we love these. So don't email us, microcosmcoaching@gmail.com. We love answering listener questions.
And join the community.
This one was so thoughtful, and it actually made me think more deeply about like how I talk about some of the stuff on the podcast, and I really appreciate that. So thank you to this listener. I've been listening for a little over a year now, and somewhat often I hear you make asides, particularly when it comes to ultra recovery about sexual health issues. Quote, if they ever intend to please their partner again, etc., etc. There was also some commentary during the pelvic floor talk a couple weeks ago. Can we get a segment sometime? I'm mostly curious as to what you are alluding to in these asides, because it seems like something with the endocrine system balancing itself out, but also curious. What is the effect of raising your volume significantly, and how does it differ between athletes of all genders? What common behaviors of runners have side effects that affect the reproductive system? Thanks, as always, for the great info.
So, yeah, thanks for the question. And I love that you've been listening for a year. Thank you. We really appreciate the support, and also for you engaging us in an awesome topic for this. So I do think this is kind of under discussed, and it's kind of just like a running joke that we
I know.
we have
I don't want to
here.
make it a joke, because it is wonderful, serious, beautiful, important, and there's a lot of really great signs that like athletes and coaches should be aware of and should feel comfortable talking about without like snickering behind their hands.
Totally.
You know?
And this is for, both our male and female athletes. So this really works all in all spectrums here. I think a quick scope note before we really dive into it. I think, we're going to mainly talk about the physiology and the patterns we see in athletes, but anything in the clinical kind of territory, i.e. Hormone testing, fertility workups, persistent symptoms. This is where, you're going to want to reach out to a sports savvy doctor. If some of this stuff resonates with you, don't be shy about reaching out to a registered dietitian. We always recommend Kylie Van Horn. She's really an excellent sports dietitian in the space. You can check her out, Fly Nutrition. So anyways, let's get into this. Let's talk about some umbrella concepts here.
Yeah. So the big one that we're gesturing out here is RED-S, or relative energy deficiency in sport. It had been known as the female athlete triad, but that has since been updated because we understand it impacts athletes of both sexes, and that the sort of constellation of symptoms that it deals with are much larger. So the IOC updated that framework in 2014. So female athlete triad, old. But the core idea here is when you're not eating enough to support both your training and basic bodily functions, your body starts to do triage. Our bodies are really smart, and a lot of times when they're sort of waving either that red flag or flashing a yellow light at us, that is something really important and worth paying attention to. Your body will cut energy to non-essential systems first, and a lot of times that's Folk's reproductive system, because your body will interpret chronic underfueling as famine, and famine is not a good time to reproduce. So it starts to sort of wind down those non-essential systems. But the technical mechanism here is that low energy availability suppresses the hypothalamus, which controls this hormonal cascade that you'll hear about called the HPG, or the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis. And that's what tells your ovaries or testes to make sex hormones. Suppress the top, and the whole chain downstream downregulates.
So what you're kind of saying is that if you have a relative energy deficiency, you're basically, from the top down, you're not really going to feel like engaging in sexual activities.
Well,
and you're also not going to have the hormonal support and the functionality to be able to do that.
In some ways, yes, but it is more complicated, and we'll talk about
I want to talk about it simply first. I mean, that's kind of what you're describing.
I would not say that's an accurate characterization because it will not always be expressed just in desire. It can, but may not necessarily.
So what's the top? What do we mean by top? Like, what's the top of the chain?
It's your hypothalamus.
Okay. And
so
then
if you're not getting enough energy, your body starts to downregulate multiple systems. Most pertinent to our discussion, your reproductive system.
Right.
So that can look a lot of different ways. In female athletes, the most clear, visible, and common signal isn't the suppression of desire, but it's menstrual dysfunction. Periods get lighter, less regular, or disappear entirely. The clinical term for the last one is hypothalamic amenorrhea. And this is really one of the biggest red flags that the athlete's body can wave because it means that estrogen is suppressed, and chronically suppressed estrogen has a whole cascade of negative effects. Bone health is really one of the biggest ones here because estrogen is a major regulator of bone density. So low estrogen plus high impact training equals stress fracture risk that is significantly elevated. Some of the long-term data here is genuinely pretty shocking. Women with prolonged amenorrhea in their 20s can have the bone density of a 60-year-old by 30, and these things can have really long tail. I've also seen athletes get DEXA scans over the course of like eating disorder recovery and really reverse course on things. So it's not like this is not being a fortune teller. If there are interventions that are effective, recovery is possible. But there are also effects on libido and arousal that are real and physiological. So lower estrogen and testosterone, which also women have as well, and is really important in terms of regulating desire, will mean lower libido, vaginal dryness, just less sexual function overall. So that's not in your head, that's hormonal, and those are things that are really worth paying attention to. They're less clear signals because they can be comorbid with a host of other things as well. Anxiety, depression, other mental health things can also cohabitate with suppressed libido.
Just to put you back on the spot, though, and to kind of direct back towards the athlete's question, I think some of the ways in which I've heard you reference at this points more to what you described than to some of this, the downstream effects of Red F.
Well, I guess to like be slightly more crude about it in the tone that we had discussed, or I think that this athlete is alluding to, is like, if you are struggling with persistently suppressed libido, that might make it worth looking at your training volume and if you're meeting your energy needs.
For like both male and female athletes.
Yes.
Across the board.
Yes.
Right.
But it does look slightly different. And again, just because you have low libido doesn't mean it is Red S. And just because you have Red S doesn't mean you will have low libido. Those things are often can go together, but they're not necessarily always going to go hand in hand. Red S itself actually is not a diagnosis. It's a constellation of, you can't get a Red S diagnosis. There's no test where you can be like, this person has Red S, which really sucks. There's like a few things that you can look at, but suppressed libido is something that I think is worth always having a serious conversation about with yourself, with your partner, with your primary care provider. And if it is sort of coming up at the same time that you have increased training volume, that's worth talking about and looking at your energy needs. So,
well, I think the complexity too, in which, in the way that, you've been describing this as a constellation of symptoms kind of means that one thing doesn't necessarily lead to another. And that sometimes these things can occur in isolation, and sometimes they can occur as maybe a cluster of symptoms.
Exactly.
And the challenge, I think, there for athletes is to, be aware of when are these yellow lights coming up. And, one symptom, could be considered a yellow light, but several symptoms might be considered something to take to another level in terms of sense of urgency around addressing it.
Changes in libido, that to me would be a yellow light.
I mean, that's sometimes pretty serious.
That's pretty serious.
I think that's
sometimes
a pretty real thing to think about.
Like, I get it. You're tired. You're not always going to want to be getting frisky at the end of every single day. I'm also a human woman. But like, if you are an athlete that menstruates and you have stopped menstruating, that's a big old red
Well,
light.
that's a
big one.
That's not a yellow light.
What this looks like in male athletes, because it is slightly different, this is often what I'm referring to, because men don't have the male athletes do not have the red light of missing menstruation, which is
Correct.
a very helpful and clear signal from the body. But again, if you get there, that's like pretty bad. That's pretty bracing. So that's like a 5-alarm body fire. Whereas reduced libido is like a check engine light. With male athletes, chronic high-volume endurance training, especially when coupled with inadequate fueling, will suppress testosterone. Some studies show endurance-trained men with testosterone levels can have will have lower testosterone levels than their non-training peers, and so the effects of that can look like lower libido, reduced sperm count and motility, and as well as morphology, decreased morning erections, mood changes, fatigue, harder time recovering between sessions, fewer erections during the night, though that one is harder.
That's kind of hard to track.
Yes, I was actually recently reading a study for YDS where they were like, it was some of the earliest research in this area where they used to just pay nurses to watch men's boners during the night. I was like, man, there was a golden age of science.
I do believe there are devices men can use to track this. If you would like to do that, there's a gentleman on Netflix who has that documentary.
Yeah, you don't need Brian Johnson's boner tracker.
Brian Johnson's boner tracker.
You don't. Morning wood is a great. I mean, I know that's not the exercise physiology term. That's a really great symptom to start with before you start trying to get shit from Brian Johnson's website.
Yeah, sure. And definitely not trying to plug whatever he's trying to sell out there on the internet. But if you're a guy and you typically, what was the terminology that you used, libido? Like if you're used to having a certain libido and that changes at any point in your training, that's a yellow light that needs to be looked at. If you're used to, I don't know, feeling a certain way and, being more aroused and that changes, that's a sign that you should take a look under the hood and understand what's going on. And for guys too, if you have these issues, some other things that we sometimes see here is low bone density, low testosterone, all of these things that make it more difficult to recover or up your risk for injury. They are also kind of hidden in there. That does sometimes take some investigation, going to a doctor, getting a blood test, getting a DEXA scan. I do see guys sometimes struggling to have this conversation, even like when I have to bring this up with some male athletes who, I'm not recovering well. I don't feel good. Okay, well, how's your libido? Or are you getting morning wood? Like, I'll just, ask people. Some people are.
We're not here to shame or stigmatize. That is a good question to ask.
No, I mean, it's a very legitimate question to ask. Just like asking, a female athlete who's dealing with some challenges, like, are you getting a regular period?
Yeah.
These are really, really important questions to ask. And I think sometimes we make light of these things in a slightly more simplistic way, but the result of overtraining or training too much is, you're going to lose libido, and that can be challenging within a relationship.
Yeah, I mean, we're elite athletes in a relationship. Many of our friends are elite athletes in various relationship configurations, and I guess to unpack the joke is that sometimes when you're running 100+ mile weeks, it's hard. It's hard to
that's
get
where
hard.
you're at.
That's where you're at. And I mean, I think that and just to sort of put a bookend on this is I think that's a really valid reason to, again, talk with yourself, talk with your partner, talk with your primary healthcare provider, because that is a quality of life thing and a sign that there's something under the hood worth checking into. It could be a sign that maybe we need to bring training volume down or increase energy intake, or it could even be something as simple as let's just make sure that your entire life isn't becoming all about running. Because again, these things can cohabitate with depression, with anxiety. There's lots of reasons that your endocrine system could be out of whack, or why sex might not be the first thing on your mind, that are all totally and equally valid. But I do think that it's really useful to be in touch with those symptoms and not discount them, or just like take it as like something that like is par for the course. Like women or
Right.
menstruating athletes really until uncomfortably recently would wear amenorrhea as a badge of honor. Like,
Yeah.
I remember I talked when I was in college and had an eating disorder. I straight up told my primary care provider I hadn't gotten a period in like 11 months. And they were like, cool, great. And I was like,
That's
okay,
shocking.
what? Yes.
That's shocking.
Yeah, right. Like, oh my God. So these are really important things. And I think our like big goal here is to like de-shame and stigmatize the stuff. Like, yes, I will giggle when I say the word boner. Yes, I do always make snide comments, I guess, like about these high volume runners, because I think for me, it sort of helps not consistently play into the narrative that more volume is inherently like better and like more manly, or like that
Right.
it like makes you a better athlete, because there are downsides to that.
And also, let's just zoom out and look at this from a holistic perspective for a quick second before we move on to the main topic around, hydration.
Mhm.
To be a successful athlete over time, we have to have healthy relationships,
Yeah.
whether they're intimate relationships with our partners or relationships with friends, community, whatever it is. Speaking for us, we're married, we have an intimate relationship.
Good to
And-
hear.
right. And, part of that is, being able to have sex.
And there's a reason neither of us is allowed to run Cocodona, because that would be
it would be the end of all of that. No, just kidding. But that could be potentially challenging. And neither of us are going to succeed in accomplishing our goals if our relationship isn't great. Because that's a big part of our support system, as it is for other athletes who have partners who help them. And so taking care of your health and your reproductive health and things like that are critical to that. If that part of your life, you're struggling with it, that will eventually find its way somehow in some way into your training.
Sexual health is health and needs attending to. I know that like I went to public school in Arkansas, so we just like straight up didn't get sex ed. So like I get it. Like there are parts of this that sort of can feel like a black box on a cultural level.
Totally.
Though thankfully I've done some subsequent Googling in the interceding years.
Well, and also I think for you with YDS and things like that, you've been really taking the deep dive into REDS and RED-S in many of those, in a lot of your research. Like you really are becoming an expert on this in ways that I am personally not.
Resident boner expert.
You are a boner expert.
Thank you.
You guys
put that on my LinkedIn.
First. It'll definitely be on your resume. But I think it's funny, but it's also serious.
Yes,
and
it is. Yes, and
right. And at the end of the day, like what you mentioned with volume and things like that, is this stuff doesn't always necessarily present itself just through the training. Often, just like REDS is kind of like a constellation of different symptoms, so is this. Like there could be a constellation of different things that lead to you not feeling great about your sexual health or your libido. So take a look, zoom out, look at your overall life stress. It might not just be trying to up your volume or doing workouts that are more intense. Also, sometimes this stuff does ebb and flow in training. For ladies, getting a regular period is a prerequisite for health and success. I do know that sex drive, however, really can ebb and flow. If you are at the peak of your training, you might not be that interested, like you said, Zoe, earlier, in getting frisky. And
honestly, just not interested in anything that's not eating an entire pizza on the couch.
Right. And
in a way that can border on the sexual.
I don't understand that at all, but that's hilarious.
Thank you.
There is some ebb and flow to this, but if those yellow lights are going off, take a look.
Yes.
It's not necessarily volume. It might not necessarily be intensity. It could be a number of factors. So try to be holistic in the way you look at these things.
Yeah.
Hopefully that makes sense.
Well, I love this question because I feel like it really helps. Like I think that I hadn't even realized the jokes I was making about this.
Yeah, I didn't really
And
realize
so
it either, but now I know.
I
You make a lot of jokes about that.
Yeah, I was like, I
Mainly
need
about
to maybe not
triathletes.
definitely about triathletes. Well, because like it fits into my like theory of comedy of like punching up, because like making fun of people who have low sex drive in and of itself is like extremely unfunny.
Yeah, that's
like,
not cool.
Again, that often like goes along with like all manner of really unpleasant life circumstances, mental health things. But making fun of people who think it's a good idea to just train like maniacs with like no context, that feels funny to me.
Not into
So
it.
I might just need to find a way to do that isn't also about boners, but also boners are funny. So I don't know, man. I'm all over the place with this one.
All right, I'm going to lead us into the main body of discussion for today. The 4 effects of dehydration that aren't cramping. So, kind of like this last conversation where we have a constellation of kind of yellow and red lights that are sometimes related and show up together and sometimes are not. Many of the things we're about to mention are all the downstream side effects of being dehydrated in a race, in a long run, in a long workout.
Yep.
And I think it's important to just start the conversation off with that in mind for everybody. If you're dehydrated, there are a lot of potential issues that are going to come up as a result of that. And they are directly downstream of the main thing of not getting in enough fluid and enough electrolytes to meet your needs.
Yep. And they're not just cramping. Cramping is actually an extremely complicated and not well understood phenomenon, which is crazy. Because I'm like, okay, we can put the Artemis people behind the moon, but we don't totally know what causes cramps. Okay,
Right.
guys, let's get some people on this. Like,
seriously,
whoever's
where are my
making
Norwegians
Brian,
at?
yeah, whoever's making Brian Johnson's like night penis container, start doing this work. It's a thing. I'm not even kidding.
You know the Norwegians aren't, dealing with that at all.
No,
Plus, it's
they
a little
get it.
too cold up there to deal with sodium and sweat.
Exactly.
We gotta get some, I don't know, some folks down in at a university in Florida on top of this.
Gatorade, they invented Gatorade. They have a long electrolyte history. And check out our Your Diet Sucks episode all about electrolytes. I think that's it's actually one of our most popular of all time,
Yes.
strangely. First thing that happens is that your metabolism gets hijacked if you are dehydrated and not getting enough sodium, because dehydration raises your core temperature, which compromises thermoregulation. If your body is hotter, it's also going to burn through muscle glycogen faster. There's a clean physiological reason for this, because enzyme activity scales with temperature. So this is called the Q10 effect. So roughly 10 to 13% increase in a metabolic rate per 1 degree Celsius rise in muscle temperature. Fun fact of the day. And dehydration also drives up circulating catecholamines like epinephrine, which directly mobilizes glycogen. So muscle glycogen depletion will also force a shift to fat metabolism, which is less efficient and requires more oxygen per unit of energy. This increases cardiac demand even when the pace remains the same. So if you're dehydrated and have insufficient sodium, it is going to, doesn't matter if you continue to take in fuel and gels, your body will not be able to get as much energy out of those.
And you're going to shift to fat metabolism, which is a much slower, less efficient, more oxygen heavy, way of fueling those muscles.
And
out
all that
there.
material is still sitting in your gut, not being used, and that's not going to feel great.
See number 3 or number 4 on the list. But before we get to that, also there are some downstream effects of these metabolic issues to our autonomic nervous system. So basically there's cognitive layer to all of this. Over very long efforts, the nervous system's ability to regulate your heart rate efficiently degrades as a result of dehydration, and this leads to exaggerated responses to effort changes. So what we see here is an impaired neuromuscular signaling and motor coordination. This is when it's harder to run technical terrain. We start to trip over things that we wouldn't normally. Also, when neurodrive becomes compromised, movement patterns become less efficient. So, the energy I would typically put into my stride is going to be it's going to require more oxygen, essentially. The energy cost per step is going to increase. And these two things combined really raise our likelihood of having an injury risk. We're not as efficient. We're not as coordinated. We're going to trip. We're going to fall. Highly technical terrain, like we often see with a lot of our ultra runners, it's going to become an issue. And this degradation compounds faster than it would on smooth surfaces. And so your breakdown is going to be much more disproportionate to the actual mileage you're covering. So you could I don't know, be covering 5 miles and be breaking down it's 10 miles.
Yes. Yeah. So that's, one of the things that's so important to talk about here is that we have to treat hydration and fueling as a single integrated system, not two separate problems. So here's what's happening on a gut level. During exercise, your blood gets pulled away from the digestive system to feed your working muscles. The science term for this is splanchnic vasoconstriction, but you can just think of it as blood traffic getting rerouted through to the legs. Your blood flow to the gut can actually drop 60 to 80% on the top end during much harder efforts. So essentially, even at lower outputs at ultra running efforts, that's going to slow everything in the gut way down. Gastric emptying, how quickly things move through your system, drops by roughly 20 to 30% once you're above 70% VO2 max. Again, those are not the numbers we're hitting in longer races, but your gastric emptying is slowed. If you pour a drink into this system that is too concentrated, water actually moves the wrong way out of the bloodstream and into the gut to try to dilute it, right? We call that gut osmolality.
Sloshing. Yeah.
Right. You call it sloshing.
I call it
gut
sloshing.
Osmolality. Yes. Because if you have two sacks of liquid separated by a permeable membrane, one side is significantly more concentrated than the other, they're going to reach equilibrium.
Right.
And when that permeable membrane is your gut, that does not feel amazing.
No.
So that's the sloshing feeling, the cramping, or I can't take another gel, or my body started to reject gels.
Burping,
so
nausea.
Birthing, nausea can be part of that as well. They're not diagnostic because a lot of those things
Totally.
can be symptomatic of other things
stuff too. Yeah.
The big thing here I think worth diving into is the sodium glucose co-transport called SGLT1. Sodium and glucose grab onto the same transporter to cross the gut wall, and water follows them by osmosis. So if you don't have enough sodium, you're not going to have efficient water absorption. That's also why multiple transportable carbohydrates, so glucose plus fructose, which uses a separate transporter called GLUT5 and goes through the liver, lets you absorb more total fuel without overwhelming any single metabolic pathway. The really wonky part, bear with me, buckle up, maybe grab yourself a bottle of electrolyte beverage.
Yep.
Under sustained heat and dehydration stress, the gut lining itself becomes more permeable. The fancy term is exercise-induced intestinal hyperpermeability. People have heard things that are leaky gut adjacent. Yes. So tight junctions between gut cells loosen. And that's a real contributor to some of these more severe race day GI issues. Hydration and core temp control are some of the biggest levers we have on this because it is a response to stress. So to de-science this a bit, the way I would think about it is sodium is kind of like the bouncer at the door of your gut wall. Glucose is on the guest list, but only if it comes in with sodium, and water tags along for the ride. So this is a really weird threesome. Skip the sodium and your fluid just will sit there sloshing, and those carbs will as well. Again, the good news is that the gut is trainable. Research shows that progressively practicing higher carbohydrate intakes and training, working up over weeks, actually upregulates those intestinal transporters. Same thing applies to fluid volume. If you only ever take in 200 calories and 12 ounces of fluid an hour in your training, your gut isn't going to magically be able to tolerate more. So practice is really important. And I think one practical tip that I do want folks to leave with, if GI distress hits, slowing down briefly, even just walking for a few minutes, will let blood flow return to the gut and can rescue an absorption problem before it becomes a negative death spiral. But a huge percentage of GI issues are actually dehydration, sodium, and potentially like pacing and output issues in disguise.
So let's talk a little bit here about effect number 3 is your blood is going to get thicker and performance is going to drop as a result of this.
Not what you want.
So plasma is the watery part of your blood. About 5% of your total blood volume is this plasma, essentially. And when you sweat, you're pulling primarily from plasma because sweat is hypotonic compared to your blood. So you lose proportionately more water than electrolytes when you sweat as a result of this. Less plasma means lower total blood volume, which means your heart pumps a smaller amount of blood per beat. So you have lower stroke volume when you're dehydrated. If you don't have as much plasma volume, your stroke volume is going to go down. So heart rate has to climb to maintain that cardiac output. And this is really, really important in our longer races because we naturally do have cardiovascular drift in these races as a result of being out there for a long time. But we can exacerbate this to negative consequences if we're not hydrated well.
Yep.
So if we're not hydrated well, we're going to have more cardiac drift earlier, and that's going to impact our RPE much later in these races, and that's going to lead to a lot more slowing down, as well as all of these other contributing factors that lead to slowing down that we mentioned earlier, like issues with your gut. So the numbers here are pretty real and really important to note. Even 1 to 2% body mass loss measurably reduces your plasma volume. So if you're not getting back in the amount of fluid you're losing during exercise, that plasma is going to decrease exponentially.
You don't have to match your outputs exactly.
No, you don't.
70
and we'll get into
to
that.
90%. Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Just don't want to imply that it's like drop for drop.
I think that's really important to state because then some athletes might accidentally
get hyponatremia.
Right.
Which is too much water, not enough sodium.
So
in there. Expensive ambulance adventure.
Those puffy hands, man. So as plasma volume shrinks, hematocrit, the cell fraction of blood, rises, blood gets more viscous, so it gets thicker, and the heart is now pumping thicker fluid through the same kind of like plumbing system, essentially.
This is also one of the reasons we really dissuade heart rate based training, because even if you're a little bit dehydrated, those numbers become a lot less reliable for a reason that may have nothing to do with your training status. So big grain of salt on heart rate based training there.
So let me just jump in with an important point on this. The feedback loop that happens here. When dehydration reduces our blood plasma volume, the body prioritizes blood flow to working muscles in the heart, and it significantly reduces perfusion to the GI tract, okay? So essentially what's happening here is our body's ability to absorb fluids and calories, that is diminished. And that creates a compounding feedback loop where we put more calories in, but we can't assimilate them. Then we have more calories, we have more food, we have more fluid stuck in our gut, but because the osmolality is not correct, that stuff just sits there. We start to get sick. We can't assimilate it. We can't replenish our glycogen stores. And we start to have much more serious downstream effects with muscular fatigue, mechanical stress, and also GI issues.
Yeah. So it's one of the, like, whenever I see a ton of cardiac drift on an athlete's activity, I'm like, let's talk fueling, let's talk hydration. And those are usually like, that's one united conversation.
Absolutely.
Also, dehydration can cause primary muscle fibers to fatigue early in endurance events. So a lot of times what people think might be a durability or an endurance issue could be dehydration. So the downstream effect is that your body will recruit less efficient secondary fibers, which demand more oxygen for the same output levels. This is especially relevant in these longer ultras and closely tied to that durability and fatigue resistance, because damaged muscle tissue, particularly from repeated downhills, increases your systemic inflammation and metabolic cost, which is going to raise heart rate independently from aerobic effort, even while pacing stays even.
That's
So
that cardiac drift
that's that cardiac
tied
drift.
into another loop in here.
That damage doesn't just feel shitty in your quads, it's extremely metabolically expensive. The inflammatory response to that damage requires additional blood flow, oxygen, energy resources. So it basically is a secondary metabolic tax on every subsequent mile. So as your primary movers like quads and glutes fatigue, the body begins recruiting synergist and stabilizer muscles more that are not as trained and conditioned for primary load-bearing roles. So hip flexors, calves, tibialis, and smaller stabilizers are going to be asked to compensate for those failing primary fibers, which can lead to this cascading fatigue pattern that spreads systemically through the kinetic chain. So having dead legs can be symptomatic, again, of this upstream dehydration or sodium issue because your muscles will not have enough energy. They won't be able to communicate well with your brain if you don't have enough sodium. So a lot going on there, and it's not always as straightforward as like, I have a cramp, because the symptoms can sometimes look like almost every like main disaster that you can experience in an ultra can be related to dehydration.
Totally, 100%.
It's like the great destroyer.
It really is, and it's a good, I think, reason for why we should do sweat rate testing.
Yes.
Which we should talk about now, because I think a lot of people overlook this. I even have elite athletes who have come to me with 10 years of training and they're still guessing.
This
at
is the
their
best
sodium
use of
concentration.
money. Like, freaking, this is the best way to spend money if you're an athlete. Like,
100%.
genuinely, we do not get kickbacks from sweat testing companies. We have no sponsor, no financial partnership or stake. This is genuinely a good thing that I think people should do. So first things to test are your sweat rate, or your fluid loss rate, which is how much fluid you are losing. And you can pretty much DIY this. Weigh yourself naked before and after an hour of running. Most ideal conditions are going to be the conditions you're running in. Like, I don't know, doing it randomly at 4 a.m. in a rainstorm is not going to be the best analog for your actual performance conditions.
Use race similar conditions.
Account for any fluid you take in. Better yet, try to do it under circumstances where you don't take in fluid.
Do a 60-minute test so you don't have to drink anything.
Don't
go to the bathroom.
Don't go to the bathroom. Do the math. Typical range is anywhere from 0.5 liter to 2.5 liters an hour, with elite outliers sometimes getting up over 3 liters. Your sweat rate will change with conditions like heat, intensity, and acclimation, so it's worth checking under those different scenarios. And your fluid loss rate is pretty movable, but thankfully it's really easy to test at home. If you're someone who is not extremely happy on a scale, really smart suggestion from Coach James Nance is to add a backpack with weight before and after, so that it just kind of scrambles the numbers on both ends. So you're just doing simpler math.
Okay, so the second piece to this is your sweat sodium concentration, which means how salty is your actual sweat.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the important one. You can't necessarily test this yourself at home.
I mean, you can't. And seeing that you have salt on your hat or your vest means nothing.
Doesn't work.
Not a thing.
Doesn't work. So what you need, there are two primary services you can use for this. Precision Hydration is one good example. It's an advanced lab-based sweat test. And then we also have Levelyne, which has a advanced lab-based mail-in test that you can do at home.
Kylie and I tested 6 different sweat tests and found those to be the easiest to use and the most accurate. I also liked H-Drop, which is one that you can use, like it's like a little wearable. It is a little more expensive, but I do think the thing that's fun about that one is you can get multiple reads under different circumstances.
Yeah. And I think that looking, at least for me, I did probably about a dozen sweat tests with the H-Drop last summer, and it was always within a reasonable margin for error with my Levelyne test. And the cool thing about these tests is it's a one and done situation. You pay a couple $100. I think Precision is maybe like $200 for the test. Levelyne, I believe it's like $120. And it's one and done. You do it, you have those results forever. Your sweat rate will change depending on environmental factors and fitness levels, but your sweat sodium concentration will always remain the same.
Yeah. So once you know your number, you know your number. So that's really great. You can't eyeball this number. You can't intuit it because the symptoms for not getting enough sodium are really similar to the symptoms for getting too much sodium. GI issues, cramping, fatigue. So if you're someone who's just like, I can't figure out my fueling or I can't figure out why I fall apart in ultras, this is like genuinely the best rock to look under. Like,
Absolutely. If you
most bang for your buck is here.
if you haven't done this before you change anything with your training, do this.
Yeah. So I think really there's like, this is one of the few things where I'm like, I unequivocally recommend this. Like, don't waste your money on dumb supplements and like Nomeo and like fancy, like whatever shit, like Normatec boots. Get your sweat tested and then tailor a hydration strategy accordingly. So, I mean, but like what's crazy is like there's huge variation, right? Like,
Yeah,
I have athletes
absolutely.
on my roster right now. I have a person that loses 200 milligrams of sodium an hour, and I have a person that loses over 2,300 milligrams of sodium an hour. That's a huge spread, folks. So like
Huge.
you can't just guess where you are. And
Yeah.
but like if something's not working, I would say wherever your rate is, you're not hitting it.
Let's get some signs on the table for ways in which you can tell if your hydration is actually off here. And so the goal with this segment is to really help teach athletes what their own signals are. Hit us with sign number one.
So with a lot of these, like the caveat is like, again, they're not perfectly diagnostic or a 1-to-1. So I just want to preface this. If you have dark urine pre-run, elevated resting heart rate, a headache, a body mass loss greater than 2% during a run. I mean, during races, you're like, it's going to be more, but during normal training runs, this is kind of the zone we want to be in. Quick caveat on the urine color is that B vitamins, beets, and a few other things can mess with it. Vitamin C, don't treat it as gospel.
Okay.
If you're feeling thirsty and dehydrated, that's a good sign. Energy levels are low and you're having GI issues.
Couple signs that you might have had too much fluid. So weight gain during a run. I think that's
like
sometimes
if you're retaining significant water.
Like if you're looking
not recommending
puffy.
weighing yourself after a run, but if you're feeling it.
Yeah, I could see that being pretty problematic for some athletes and maybe lead to not taking in enough fluid because they're concerned they're going to gain weight. So we really want
that is spectacularly done. Respectfully.
I've coached a lot of people over the years, as have you. One of the things that I would say is helpful in making a distinction between, water retention and hydration levels is if your hands are puffy or if you have like weird swelling, that might be a sign you're retaining water.
Yeah.
Frequent urination mid-effort. That's another sign. Sloshy stomach, as we mentioned before, that kind of like leaky gut, like we're not assimilating what we're putting in. Nausea as well. Confusion. These are kind of signs of that hyponatremia territory. And I think it's worth saying that like low blood sodium is more dangerous than being a little dehydrated.
Yes.
So you really want to get that balance right. It's so critical for all of the processes we mentioned before. If you want to feel good late in your marathon, if you want to feel good late in your ultra, you've got to have that down.
The most common thing I see with my athletes when it comes to like either DNFs or having a tough time in races is more often than not low sodium. They usually that exists with dehydration. It's someone just like not doing all the things totally right. But more often than not, it's the low sodium that causes really big issues.
Let's talk about the need for sodium though, because chronic GI distress, also muscle twitches in the heat, can't quench your thirst no matter how much water you drink, feeling off in warm conditions can all be signs that we're not meeting some of our sodium needs out there.
Yeah, if you've had too much sodium, again, those things can look pretty similar. GI distress and bloating, persistently salty taste, like feeling like just over salted. If you can't drink more without nausea, the fluid feels like it's not going anywhere. A lot of those can be signs you've had too much sodium. Again, not diagnostic. These things are all really hard. This is why we recommend the sweat test. So I would just say if you're having issues and don't feel good, do the tests.
Do the test.
Like if you took the time to listen to us ramble for 7 minutes about this shit, like get a test.
Get the test done.
So here's how to build a hydration strategy. Hydrate consistently throughout the day. Salt your food normally. You don't have to chase a magic ounces number. The kidneys are really good at managing this when your sodium intake is adequate. For like a light sanity check, light yellow urine a few times a day, not constantly clear. That might be overhydration in some cases. Not constantly dark. That's either over or under hydration or a bizarre supplement routine and or an affinity for beets. In the 24 to 48 hours before a race or a big run, a modest sodium bump above baseline, especially if you know you're a saltier sweater, don't overdrink water. It can actually counterproductively dilute plasma sodium and can get peed out anyway. So you don't need to like water load the night before, just slightly increase your intake according to your needs.
Pre-run, we recommend roughly 16 to 20 ounces of electrolytes about 75 minutes before the run. Really, you could start as early as 2 hours before, just sipping as you go to make sure you're hydrated. If you're one of these athletes who is peeing a lot before a race, don't do this. Like if that might be a sign you drank too much the day before the race. So really keep an eye on how much you're urinating. It really is a clear signal around how hydrated you are. During the event itself, thirst is always a reasonable baseline. 90 minutes or a 2-hour run. But as soon as you get really up over that 90-minute or 2-hour mark, it's important to start basing your hydration on a sodium sweat test and fluid loss test.
This is really where I feel like general recommendations just fall flat for a lot of, like, again, if you've listened this far and if you run enough to listen to a running podcast, you owe it to yourself to figure out what your specific needs are, because the general guidance is like 300 to 800 milligrams of sodium an hour. The majority of folks that I have get sweat tests. Again, it's self-select because they're people that have realized the general guidance doesn't work for them, so they've gone and gotten tested, but almost everyone exists off of that spectrum.
Way
so
above that.
I see numbers all over the place, and I think it's just really helpful for people to actually get that sense. So some ways to actually get that sodium in are drink mixes like Element, Precision Hydration, Scratch, Tailwind, which can contain from 200 milligrams on the lower end up to 1,000 more milligrams per serving. Match the product to your testing and your specific needs. More sodium is inherently better. Like if you don't need 1,000 milligrams of sodium an hour, Element and like just salting yourself will not give you an advantage that will cause you
that can make you really sick in there. I have had athletes in the past who thought they were really salty sweaters. So we did, they had issues. They did more and more sodium. The issues never cleared up. They finally got a test and they realized, wow, I actually only lose 200 milligrams of sodium an hour.
Yeah.
And it's like, whoa, that's an alarmingly low number. Like you have to make sure your products have barely any sodium, essentially, or you're going to get sick. And it can be really easy to take in too much sodium if you're not careful. So again, it does work both ways. There's a spectrum here where we do have some similar symptoms on either end. And if we don't really know, but we're having those symptoms, we need to get the test.
Yeah. Salt capsules like Salt Stick or Precision Hydration's caps, or even like Scratch has like a sodium enhancer thing. So like if you're just drinking normal, lots of these brands do. Yeah. They're useful when you want sodium without as much flavor or volume. The big challenge can be when you introduce a larger bolus of sodium all at once. Some people can struggle with digesting that and it can cause GI distress for some folks. So definitely practice it in training. Real foods like pretzels, broth, pickle juice, salted boiled potatoes can be great. I think that broth is a sleeper champion at longer ultras.
You love broth.
I love my broth. Layering also matters. You know, a saltier sweater might put some plain water in the bottle, use some salt caps so that they can stale sodium independently of fluid intake, or run a moderate sodium drink, add caps as needed. There will be sodium in a lot of like your sports nutrition. So all of these things need to work together, and you have to be able to adjust up given environmental conditions. So it is complicated. It can sometimes feel like a moving target, but like, this is, I think, one of the most important, like when we spend so much of this podcast talking about things that don't work, and like, finally, for the love of sweet Christ, here is a thing that works.
And this is like a silver bullet that literally
Well, it's a silver bullet in
works.
that it gives you information, but then you actually do have to execute on the information.
Okay,
which,
all right. You're right. It's a bronze bullet.
Consistently.
You actually have to do the work after you get the test. So it's not...
It's like how training is a silver bullet. It's like, yeah, being told what to do is great as long as you do it consistently.
I'm changing the definition of silver bullets. It's really just knowing exactly what you need to do and then doing it over and over again for years.
Yeah, but the big point here is that hydration is a system and not a single number. It shifts with heat, shifts with altitude, sleep, life stress, menstrual cycle. So build your defaults, then read your signals and adjust. And again, money spent on a sweat test, if that saves you an expensive DNF, chef's kiss to that.
Yeah. So thanks for listening, guys. I know that was a lot of information, but I hope it impresses upon you the importance of hydration and all of the negative impacts of being dehydrated, especially in these longer races. If you're racing a 5 or a 10K, hydration probably isn't a big factor in those events. But as soon as you're doing something that's going to be up over 90 minutes, if you're doing it wrong, those compounding effects are costing you time. They are preventing you from PRs. They are making the experience less enjoyable. So get a sweat test, and you will be very happy with the results that come from that one simple thing. Anyways, thank you all. We always appreciate hearing from you. So if you have any topics, questions, hot or nots, please send us an email, as always, microcosmcoaching@gmail.com, and check us out, microcosm-coaching.com.